Well, all of this to say, look at, God loves everyone, but he wants us all to be willing to lay down everything for him and let him reinvent. And the moment you're like, God, I'll give you most of me, but this area you have no right to touch, is not handing your life over to him. That's just in fairness. But you can't single anyone out in comparison, because truth be told, we all have something. It's kind of like that Beauty and the Beast, don't touch the West Wing kind of thing. But there's something amazing what happens when you hand that over to him and you give him the opportunity, and somewhere down the line you start to realize there's nothing you can hand over to him that he can't make better than what you have. You'll never trade down when you give God something. There's no area you go like, well, here, take this, and the guy goes, well, I got something a lot worse to give you. That's just nonsense. But the problem is he may not just give you something right away. Sometimes that thing just has to be removed because you need to detox from it before he gives you the right thing, or you wouldn't know what to do with it. If John had this natural tendency that he just is given over to wanting to stab people all the time, so you hide all of the kitchen knives, you hide all of the butterfly knives, you hide anything that's basically sharp. Well, and then all of a sudden, but John has this thing where he sort of loves, he loves like letter openers. Well, in the end, you may have the best letter opener, but until he's delivered from wanting to stab people, a letter opener is still a weapon. And in that same way, God wants to remove things from our lives and leave some space in between so that when he gives us something good, we actually do something good with it. We don't just use it to elevate ourselves. Does that make sense? We are now in 2 Kings chapter 20 of a 25 chapter book, which means we have 6 chapters, including this one, to go to finish the book of 2 Kings. Our time stamp at this moment is the 700s BC. And in the 700s BC, and that's sort of important to sort of start with in all of this, like always, please never just believe me, never just assume what I'm saying is true. Always search the scriptures, always read your Bibles, and test everything by it, which includes me. And with that, please consider that in about 960 BC, 980 BC, the kingdom split. The 12 tribes were divided into 2 different kingdoms. It was a civil war. The northern area was called Israel. The southern area was called Judah. The northern area had all of the tribes except Benjamin and Judah, and if you will, some renegade Levites. The northern one had the other 10 tribes, and that's where the land was allotted for them. Of the 19 kings in the north, never was one of them decent. Never was one of them godly. Never was one of them seeking the Lord. Of the 20 kings in the south, we have at least 8 that were decent, that have done something. But what happens is, in the south, you have this sort of flip-flop that happens on a lot of people's walks with God, which is like they have this amazing time where they're on fire for God and they want to clean out everything, and then they kind of go back to stupidity. And then somewhere down the line, it's like you sober up, and then you go, what the heck am I doing? But the problem has been, until this particular king, is that they've done some form of reform, but they haven't gone all out. There has never been all-out cleaning up. Now, this is what that would look like if we were to talk about it for us. There are things that are socially acceptable within the Christian realm that are still not applauded by God. And understand, there are things God says that things are permissible, but not everything edifies. And somewhere down the line, we start to grow out of what is acceptable, and we start moving to, but will it bless someone? Now, I don't expect a person who's just accepted Jesus Christ to be governed by that necessarily. Although, to be honest, usually when you first give your life to Christ, you think full on, and then you hang out with a bunch of Christians that start to convince you that you don't have to be full on, which in my opinion is completely a travesty. You started by being you and Jesus, and you were in love, and you wanted nothing to get in between that. Then you hang out with some people like, yeah, but we could do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that's okay. What a shame. But if you watch enough Christians fall, enough people in leadership fall, enough people that seem to be superstars fall hard on their face, somewhere down the line you look and you go, whatever they were doing, I shouldn't do. And if we were to say it this way, there were denominations, there were organizations of people that were so crazy full on for God that they would challenge every one of us. I think of the Wesleys. Now, it isn't like I adulate these men. Other than this, I would like to be friends with people like this. I was just telling Jamil earlier that there was a man who said, my doctor told me I can't get up at 4 a.m. and preach anymore, so I fired him. That was John Wesley, or John Wesley, and he was 87 years old. And one of my favorite quotes, he says, give me the whole, I should just quote it literally for what it says. Don't let me, listen to this beautiful quote. He says, I want the whole Christ as my Savior, the whole Bible for my book, the whole church for my fellowship, and the whole world for my mission field. Give me 100 men that hate nothing but sin and love Jesus Christ, and we'll shake England for God. I'm like, where are those people today? We get to this place where we get so caught up in being cool. Here's the crazy part. That same denomination, if you will, that those two founded, I'm convinced that those guys would be setting those churches on fire today. They would be arrested for it because they are so opposite of what these guys initially stood for. Now, I can't say that about every one of those meetings, but I can tell you that the blanket doctrines of those things are so opposite of what those two guys stood for. And you look at that, and the only reason I say that is, it started off really good, but how in the heck did it get here? And we can look we can talk about the Anglican Church, we can talk about anything, but any group of people, organization, or identifiable distinctives are en route for that unless something changes. But let's be honest, that's just a macrocosm of us individually. Every one of us have the potential of being stark, ravingly mad in our sin, and also have the opportunity of being absolutely flamboyantly awesome for Jesus Christ. And that is your choice. Now, you could blame it on all the circumstances around you all you want, but if you're blaming it on the circumstances, you've already diminutionized the God who can overcome anything. Now, I'm not in any way trying to belittle challenges, but the moment you're like, well, I'm a victim and I'm just going to surrender to this, you are already not giving God a chance to have victory. Now, the reason I say that is this particular king, Hezekiah, was a greater king, according to Scripture here, than even David. He's not given the press that David is, but this is the thing that made him so unique, is he was the house cleaner in the beginning of his years. He not only brought the church, if you will, or in this case Judaism, back to its place where it was, but he took it beyond that to the things that were acceptable within the community, but not acceptable in God's sight. They were worshiping the golden brass serpent that Moses lifted up in the wilderness in the book of Numbers. He called it Nehushtan, which literally means brass thing, bronze thing. And he ground it into pieces, chucked it into pieces. It's no longer something to be worshipped. And that was something they had done since Moses' day, which was the 1440s BC. Which means it even went through the time of Judges, through the time of David, and through every king before this point. But this guy's like, we're done with that. No more worshiping anything but God. Now think about within the church the things we could worship. We could worship, first of all, we could worship things that have nothing to do with the church, that are just in the world. Footballers, people that are just gifted and talented, be that musically or in some other form of the arts, be that as an actor. It is amazing how some people get worship within the church that are so opposite in their behavior and mindset to Jesus Christ. But then you can worship churchy things too. You could worship a church, you could worship a pastor, you could worship worship. But in all of that, it's still not worshiping Jesus. And someone on the line is like, look at one thing and one thing alone, and that's God. Let's start clearing out all of that. But just because he has this amazing beginning does not mean he ends well. So do some math with me for just a moment, and then we'll start reading through our chapter, okay? Now we get to the end of Hezekiah's life, and I'm sorry to tell you, it's not as great as the beginning. Now, let me ask you, when was the last time you've known someone long enough to be able to say that their latter years in Jesus were greater than their younger years? I intend on being that person, by the way. I mean, you watch people, they're so excited about Jesus at the beginning of their life, and then somewhere down the line they learn how to be cynical and lazy and just inarticulate to anything God calls. Well, that's never what God intended. Let me ask you, have you ever met a couple that's more in love with each other today than they were when they were first married? Yeah. I'd say the same with us. In November, that's next month, in less than a month, my wife and I will be married 29 years. And I guarantee you, we are infinitely more in love today than we ever were back then. Yeah. You know, you guys, you could almost be our kids without scandal. So listen to these numbers for a second, okay? Hezekiah takes the throne at 25 years old. Dare I say, is there anyone around the table who's 25 years old? Are you 25? No.
Just a bit slightly.
Slightly over that? Okay. And it tells us that he rules for 29 years. Okay? And he dies. I mean, dying tends to keep you from ruling. Unless, of course, you're Jesus. So how old is he when he dies? 54. Excellent. Nice. That was good. Okay, y'all with me so far? Now, for the sake of things, if you die at 54, subtract 15 years from that. How old are you at 15 years less than that? 39. Don't worry, I won't be doing this the whole time. I'm just starting with this. You're like, I hate maths. How did you turn a Bible study into maths? You'll see why that's important here in a moment. 39 years old is a person that has 15 years till he's going to die. Does that make sense? Keep that in mind. This guy, I remind you, he's gotten 3 chapters in this particular book. We'll get more, by the way, in the books of the Chronicles, but he also gets 2 chapters specifically linked to these events in the book of Isaiah, too, chapters 38 and 39, where we get almost the exact same story, word for word, but we get a little added information I'll be able to put in to help us understand something. Now, he's known first for clearing house, down to Nehushtan, but then he gets challenged, I remind you, by the Assyrian Empire. Assyria at this point is in its heyday. It is known for skinning people alive, ripping babies out of pregnant women and showing them before the mom dies. I mean, forgive me for being so graphic, I'm just letting you know. It's painting that picture for a reason. These people were evil and awful and horrendous, and they have been unstoppable. By this point, they've taken over almost entirely the area of Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, and Syria. The only area left is Israel. At that point, they will have conquered that entire area up to the Mediterranean. However, something just happened. He sends 3 delegates, if you remember. The delegates basically tell them, you better tell the king, why are you trusting in God? Don't believe in your king. Don't believe in your God. None of the other gods have ever been able to stand up to us. This guy's going to be no match either. Hezekiah initially asks for Isaiah to pray for him. He asks for intercession. But then after that, as they proceed, that ultimately he just goes and prays himself. And that will always be the wisest thing. When you hit a trial, hey, it's not bad to get other people to pray for you, but you got to get on your face before God to hear him speak personally. And God says, here's the thing. And remember, he calls Jerusalem his virgin daughter? And the idea of it is, you ain't getting near my girl. You ain't touching my girl. You ain't getting near my girl. No one's been able to get at my girl. You ain't getting at my girl. No, that may not sound like that to you, but in my head there are times he sounds like Mr. T, but then I was born in Chicago. That's what you get. And ultimately what happens is, and I want to remind you, it was the largest army in the history of mankind up to that point. And 185,000 men surround Jerusalem. That's not even the entirety of the army. That's just the amount that's besieged Jerusalem. And in one night, one angel destroys 185,000 men. One angel. We don't even have his name. It isn't like he's like super buff angel, or like God's got like, hey, let's just get like crazy killer angel. And people are like, well, I think it's Michael, I think it's Gabriel, I think it's whoever it is. God never gives us his name here. All we read is an angel. So God kind of looks around and he goes, which one of you wants to take out a Syrian army? Hey, you, what's your name? Mortimer. Perfect. All right, Mort, come here for a second. Mort, let's hear it. And not only does he do it, he does it quietly because he kills. Now, how do you, I don't even want to know if you could figure this out. How do you kill 185,000 people and the king, who happens to be amidst them, I remind you, the king's not going to be in a corner. He's going to be surrounded by these guys. The king never even wakes up. And then the king does, finally, and then he kind of looks around and he's like, oh, y'all should be getting up now. And 185,000 guys are dead. So what does the king do? He goes back home. He's like, I think I better go home. Now, please understand, he does say this message to the king, and there is a mercy in it. He says, God says, I allowed you to take down all of those other places so the world would know they're not gods. So you may have had victory over false gods everywhere, but now you're messing with the real one, baby. Now again, this is my interpretation. But now you're messing with the real one, and you are going to learn now that I am the real one. But I have let you have victory over all of those so that they can see that this isn't it. But there was one other god that it was yet to be taken down. And you know which one it was? His God. Because the king of Assyria still had his own God too. So what happens is, could you have written a better thing than this? How God planned this? The guy goes back not only to where he came from, which by the way is Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, but he goes into the temple of his own God, whose name is Nisroch, and he's murdered in his own temple by his children. And look at, in the end of it all, what you've learned is, not when you're messing with the real one, even any other god, including the ones you've taken down and the one you've given credit to, none of the fake gods will protect you from the real one. And so it ends with that king dying. And as that king dies, that becomes the first domino to fall to destroy the invincible Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire now will never be a threat again. But Assyria is in the area, in essence, of Iraq. But on farther from Israel is the area of Iran today, and that was the area known as Babylon. In Babylon, 900 miles away, starts to rise up and fill the vacuum that was left by Assyria. Does that make sense? Now, this King Hezekiah has watched the fall of the Northern Empire, those 10 tribes. He watched them fall. And he has been a great king. But now, we get to the last time of his life, and I want to warn you, it's not as pretty. Does that make sense? Okay, well, let's read along, shall we? And let's see if we can go around. In those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, went to him and said to him, Thus says the Lord God, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. Because after all, if you're going to die, you're not going to live.
Then he turned his face towards the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying,
Remember now, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth, and with what a loyal heart, and have done what was good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly.
And it happened before Isaiah had gone out into the middle court, that the word of the Lord came to him, saying,
Return and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, Thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears, surely I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord.
Sorry, verse 6.
And I will add to your days 15 years. I will deliver you and the city from the hand of the king of Assyria. And I will defend the city for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David.
Okay, let me stop here for just a moment. How many years is he going to add to his life? 15. How old is he when he dies? 59. Was that? No, wait, 54. Sorry, 54. You were right. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. See, don't just believe what I say. Okay, so 54. So how old is he right now? He's 39. Does that make sense? That was why we did the math a little bit. So he's 39 years old. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
Then Isaiah said, take a lump of sticks. So they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered it.
I say to what's the sign that's first the Lord and that I should go out to the house of the Lord.
But Isaiah said, this is a sign to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the things which are spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go backward 10 degrees?
Hezekiah, it isn't easy thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. No, I let the shadow go backward 10 degrees.
So Isaiah the prophet cried out to the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down, don't miss this, on the sundial of Achaz. Let's stop there. What does that mean the shadow goes forward or backward? What does that mean?
Time goes back.
Excellent. That means time is moving.
Well, the earth retracts.
Okay, now, there's two things here that are actually kind of crazy with science. Here's the first of them. This guy is sick. He's going to die. He's laying on his bed. We might say at this point, it's his deathbed. What do we know about his sickness according to this? Well, we know one thing. He's got a boil. I don't know about you, but the idea of death by boil sounds pretty stinking awful. So if it's death by boil, yeah. So let me ask you, how does a person die from a boil?
Maybe it's cancer.
That's exactly it. Septicemia, traditionally. That was quick, man. Yeah, because what a boil is in essence is your body frantically trying to remove an infection. Now, where is the boil?
On his leg.
What's that?
On his leg.
How do you know?
What did it say on his leg?
We're so visual.
Oh no, yeah, sorry.
You know where the boil is? I know exactly where the boil is.
He needs to walk to the house of the Lord.
What's that?
He needs to walk to the house of the Lord. It says, put on his foot.
Yeah, I would say it was on his body. That I'm confident in. The boil was on his body. Now, where it was beyond that, I don't know. Hey, that was safe. That was just playing it safe here.
I don't know why I put it on his leg.
Well, this is the important thing is, we talk about three terms, and they're really important terms: biblical, extra-biblical, and anti-biblical. Biblical means you can just, there's the verse that says it. Like he had a boil. We could all agree looking at this that there was a boil. Anti-biblical means it's completely opposite what the scripture says, so in other words, it's wrong. Like, oh, well, it wasn't a boil at all, it was actually that his head was decapitated and he had to get glued back on. Well, that's anti-biblical. Does that make sense? Now, in between those two are these areas we call extra-biblical. In other words, we can't prove that it isn't true, but we also can't prove that it's true, and it's a dumb hill to die on, if that makes sense. And you know what? This is how denominations sometimes start, not always. Well, we're the boil on the leg group. We're the boil on the neck group. Yeah, but in the end of it all, does it really matter? What we can be confident, and we all can agree, that boil was on his body somewhere. Does that make sense? So, he's got a boil. Now, likely septicemia, cancer maybe. But to be honest, cancer is a relatively, I can't say it's a new invention, but it tends to be something that the more, well, anyways. Yeah, there's all kinds of things with food additives and things we eat and all of those kind of things that tend to be a part of it. But safely to say there's an infection somewhere in there. Does that all make sense? So how is he going to fix this thing? What does God tell him to do?
Put figs on the lungs.
Yeah. Now what we'll read in the book of Isaiah is that he makes a poultice of it. Does anyone know what a poultice is? It's a goo. Take a bunch of figs, grind them until it's gooey. You know, we might say like make a porridge of it. Just don't boil it. Just grind it until it's gooey. Now, it amazes me how many people although I understand this, I'm going to spend years figuring out the healing propensities of figs. Now, no doubt, figs could potentially heal. But to be honest, if you talk to doctors that are specifically, whether it be endocrinologists or people that speak specifically in infections, they could tell you about, especially ones that are decent Christian doctors, they could really search this out. And there'll always be somebody on YouTube that thinks they've discovered something new on it. It's just important to recognize this was a miracle. This wasn't just God with a deeper understanding of medicine, if that makes sense. Now, he could certainly use it either way. Why didn't God just have Isaiah wave his hands over it? Because God often likes to use something else as an agent of healing. Something that happens that gives a chance for you to engage your faith. Something that happens in your life where God will do something and then go, now, do you trust me? To be honest, even though it tells us that he was being restored, he was restored from it, what seemed evident is that Hezekiah didn't know it. Because Hezekiah says, how do I know that I'm going to be healed? Even though, read what it says. This is what it says. In verse 7, he took a lump of figs, he laid it on the boil, and he recovered. Did you get that? No. For what it's worth, the word for recover is the word chayo. You can see right there. Chayo. And chayo, by the way, means to fix, strengthen, or revive. In other words, he was healed right there, and he didn't even know it. So he's like, well, how do I know I'm going to be healed? How funny is that for a guy to say that when he's actually well? He just doesn't know it. Now, does that mean that the boil was gone? Excellent. We don't know. Could it be that God actually healed it, but the boil still needed a time to recover? I don't know. I find it hard to realize. Now, it could be one of two things. Well, again, now we're talking extra biblical area here. You could be so overcome by the problem you don't see the healing in front of you, and that can definitely happen. Or God can heal the inside and allow the outside to actually work its way out. Now, both of those we could find scriptural support for. There is a story, and it's one of my favorites in the Old Testament, interestingly enough, of the mother of Ishmael. And her name is Hagar, the Egyptian. You know, some people go to Egypt and they get like a t-shirt that says, I went to Egypt, and all I got was this dumb t-shirt. Or some get like little, pyramid keychains. Abraham went to Egypt and he came back with a slave girl, and then he married her. Everyone's got their souvenirs. I'm not endorsing that. But ultimately, when Sarah gets pregnant, this girl gets booted out with her boy. And she goes out she's driven out into the wilderness, and she is dying of thirst. And she puts her child a bow shot away from her. And I kind of get this. If you're a parent, you get this. Can I die before my kid, please? I can't even, and I can only say that the grief I've seen there is when I've had to tell parents that their children have passed away. It's a grief like no other grief you see. And I can see her just saying, could you please just take me first? That's a mother's prayer. She's on one side, and then he's far away. And it says, and the Lord, by the way, the first time you read the angel of the Lord is speaking to her, for what it's worth. And it says, then the Lord opened her eyes, and right next to her was a well of water. She was about to die of thirst, right next to a well of water. How did she not see that well of water? Well, she may have been too blinded by her grief and too overwhelmed by the circumstance to not even see the solution right in front of her. Now, it doesn't say it was an underground spring. There are different Hebrew words for that. The fact that it actually says the word beer, the word for well, tells us it was actually a dug place. It was actually already established as a place for water. And that can happen in every one of our lives, let's just be honest. You can get so wrapped up in your problem, you don't see the solution that's right in front of you. And it's crazy when this happens. And by the way, all kinds of movies are written about this, but usually they're kind of sappy, should I say this way, sort of, you know, you have to go with your wife to a movie, and you know, where it's like, you know, the girl, it's like her best friend is a guy, but she's always wants this guy, but you know in the end they're going to end up together, and oh, the person that really loved me was always in front of me the whole time, and you're like, yeah, I've never seen that before. But, you know, but in the end of it all, you kind of get the idea that you look at that and then you go, well, that's kind of sappy, but to be honest, it's the story of many of our lives. That the Lord is actually right there wanting to solve the problem and wanting to be our peace when we're trying to find peace somewhere else. Or wanting to actually give us joy when we're trying to find happiness. And wanting to actually cover us in love and show us that we're complete in Him. But we're convinced until we get this thing, we're incomplete. Now, that stuff here is the enemy really trying to keep you from actually being content in Christ. And you know what happens? Life sucks. And the reason is because you know there should be more out there, but it's kind of like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get, and you don't understand it. You're like, and here's the weirdest part, no matter how many times you do it, you just keep thinking, if just a little bit more, if I just do a little bit more, then I'll actually get what I'm looking for. But it's insanity. You know, it's like, I personally, no, this has nothing to do with walking with Jesus, but I personally don't like coffee. I've never liked it. I'm a big tea person. Jamil and I, we get along very well in this area. And Jamil, I love the fact he actually has an educated palate in tea. But one of the things is, first of all, I don't like it because it tastes like dirt to me. And my mom, but hey, you're welcome to drink it all you want. My mom used to smoke and drink coffee all the time. It'll deliver you from either. She had that goo on her nails and that breath. That'll cure you. But when I drink coffee, it makes me tired. And if I drink 1 cup of coffee, it makes me tired. If I drink 2 cups of coffee, it makes me real tired. If I drink 3 cups of coffee, I need a nap. And what's weird is I keep thinking, Mom, maybe, you know, I'm in Italy, and they're like, oh, you know, it's espresso. Okay, I'll have like a triple espresso. They're like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm like, dude, don't give me a Vespa, give me a bed. But you know, you just keep going, but if I just do a little bit more, maybe a little bit more of that stupid type of relationship, a little bit more trying to get that thing, and in the end of it all, you just can't see that God's like, you're trying to fill your room with a vacuum, and it's just sucking out of you the very thing you're trying to get. But on the other side of it, there's this other side where it may not be, or it may be that God is healing it on the inside out. Apparently that's it for some people. Where God, listen, please hear me on this. We live in a world that treats symptoms. And we don't have time in our 9 minutes that we are allotted in a GP's office to get to the cause. And as long as we can keep you sedated from the symptoms, we can keep you placated. But the problem is you never find a cure by simply treating symptoms. But Jesus isn't about just giving you therapy for a side issue or for the symptoms. Jesus is about curing the cause. And a lot of times, here becomes the problem, is that when the cause gets cured, there's still time in between that cure and those symptoms that have to work their way out. And we're so busy trying to treat the outward observances of it, we're just assuming, well, I don't know, I still have struggles, I'm still challenged, I must not be well. And you're going, God's like, trust me, I fix things from the inside out, because what I've learned is, things that are done quick are seldom permanent, but my God does things permanently. I could kick up a lot of dust, but only He can move mountains. Either way, He takes a lump of figs, grinds it into this goo. Now, which one of you wants to be Isaiah? Who knows where the boil is, but have you ever seen a boil? A boil's a gross and nasty thing. My daughter, my youngest, she is super allergic to mosquitoes. In fact, to any bug bite. But she gets boils. and she gets boils about the size of a 50-cent piece from a mosquito bite. Yeah, Hawaii is not her place. And she has hair down to her ankles, and so you can imagine anything warm isn't cool either for her. But that is a body reacting to a poison, but it's a very small amount of poison, and it's not going to kill her. Now take that small boil and make it the size of your leg. Because if you think, how big does a boil have to be before you start thinking, this just might kill you? So you've got something, pardon me for saying, gooey, gross, and nasty. And then God says, David, you're going to go heal that guy. Go and make a goo and rub it on his goo. The humanity and the humility of you going, all right, I'm the goo guy. But that's a goo for God. But there's something about being willing to actually minister to somebody in their grossest moment that makes the biggest difference. And you realize your closest friends, you'll look back 10 years from now, will be those people. They will be the people when you were the biggest mess and weren't afraid of you. Or were afraid of you, but still did what was necessary. They were the ones that held your hair back when you were sick. They were the ones that made sure they took care of you when those moments where you're like, I did recover, they may never recover from what they had to do. But to be honest, it's what a parent does to their kids. Now, go and do that. Now, in the book of Acts, in the last 2 chapters, Paul is shipwrecked. Some of you are familiar with the story, on an island called Malta. Yeah. Of the 376 people that are there, that wind up on the island, it's raining, it's cold, and Paul is helping with the fire by grabbing sticks and throwing it into the fire to help keep the fire warm for everyone else. And a snake is part of the sticks, latches onto him. It doesn't just say it bites him, it's hanging on him. So Paul throws the sticks onto the fire, and then there's this thing dangling on him. And I love what it says. He just shook it off into the fire. I love the fact it was a serpent, because it's like, this is what happens. You're trying to do good and you're trying to serve the Lord and you get bit. And what it says is that the natives were waiting for him to swell up and die. So apparently they're familiar with the snake, and they're like, when that snake bites people, they die from it. But they don't just die, they swell up. And might I say, this is the classic example for every one of us. You get bit when you're trying to do what's right, and you swell up. You know what that is? You get full of yourself. And you're like, who does that person think they are? I'm entitled to. And you get all of this, like this personal justice. And you know what happens when you swell up? You die. All the great stuff that you have going on just finds up in the toilet. Y'all with me? And then they watch him, and they realize he isn't dying, and then they decide he's a god. I mean, either he's a murderer or he's God. And then they realize that this guy actually has this gift of healing, and it says there was a leading citizen on the island. Now that, in other words, that's the governor, who is in bed dying of dysentery. Do you know what dysentery is? Well, pardon me for being American. It's putting the dye in diarrhea. Yeah, that was pretty cruel, but well, we all got it now. And I remind you, this is before flesh. Although the Greeks did in cities have fleshly toilets. Well, they had a sewage system. And this guy's in his deathbed, dying from dysentery. And Paul goes in there and lays hands on him. Which one of you wants to do that? But the brilliance of God in this, to find people who are willing to literally get their hands dirty. What we find is, I think that our walk with God is not suffering because our hands are too dirty. I think sometimes our walk with God is suffering because our hands are too clean. They're too clean from touching those who really need it with the boldness of Jesus Christ. Well, in this particular story here, we have this particular case. Now, I remind you, Isaiah comes in and goes, get your house in order, you're dying. And what does this guy do? He rolls over to the wall and he goes, God, come on, man. I've been good. And now you're taking my life from me. And God stops him and he goes, Isaiah, turn around, go get some figs, make your goo, slap it on the boy. He's going to be better. Y'all with me on that? Now this is what you don't get from the book of 2 Kings, but what you will get in the Isaiah story, which again is the same story in this. Listen to this. This is Isaiah chapter 38. If you have your Bibles, check up on me on this. So go ahead and flip there. In Isaiah 38, for what it's worth, I remind you, Isaiah is ministering during the same time as this. We're in the 700s BC, roughly 710, 720. Well, roughly 710s, because 722 is when the northern kingdom's taken captive. And we read in verse 9, this is the writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and had recovered from his sickness. I said, in the prime of my life, I shall go to the gates of Sheol. I am deprived of the remainder of my years. I said, I shall not see Yah, the Lord, in the land of the living. I shall observe no man, no more, among the inhabitants of the world. My lifespan is gone, taken from me like a shepherd's tent. I have cut off my life like a weaver. He cuts me off from the loom. From the day until night, you make an end of me. I have considered until morning like a lion. So he breaks all my bones. From day until night, you make an end of me like a crane or a swallow. Caw-caw. So I chattered. I mourned like a dove. My eyes failed from looking upward. Oh Lord, I'm oppressed. Undertake for me. What shall I say? He has both spoken to me, and he himself has done it. I shall walk carefully in my years in the bitterness of my soul. O Lord, by these things men live, and in all these things is my life and my spirit, so you will restore me and make me live. Indeed, it was for my own peace that I had great bitterness, but you have lovingly delivered my soul from the pit of corruption, for you have cast all my sins behind your back. Sheol can't thank you. Death cannot praise you. Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your truth. The living man, he shall praise you, as I do this day. The Father shall make known your truth to the children. The Lord was ready to save me. Therefore we will sing my songs with stringed instruments all the days of our life in the house of the Lord. Now, did you notice there were two basic parts to that? The first part is, first of all, Isaiah told me I was going to die. And I went, what? In the bitterness of my soul, you've stolen my life away like a crane, like a swallow that just is gone. And you see him waxing eloquent in this way where it's like he's just having a hissy fit. Now, please hear me. These 15 years of Hezekiah's life that he gives him will be the worst years of Hezekiah's life. They will be the easiest years of Hezekiah's life. And somewhere in the ease, they will be the worst. See, what Hezekiah has had up to this point is a life of challenge with the king of Assyria, I remind you. His life has been benchmarked with challenges, with struggles, with hardships. But he has risen up to every one of those challenges, and in those challenges he has proven himself a godly man. Let me ask you, where was David's greatest failure?
He didn't go to battle.
Before that point, David was willing to take on a man 10 and a half feet tall. And he was roughly 16, 17 years old. He was not a trained warrior. He was just convinced if that guy's going to insult my God's going to take him down. Which one of you is willing to actually let God do that through him? I'll do it if no one else. And listen, David was always safer on the battlefield with the Lord than he ever was in the palace by himself. Be careful. I've humbly said, God, if I get to this place where I am so comfortable in my faith that I actually start walking away from you, just kill me. Kill me before I have a chance to be this stupid. Does that make sense? So, up to this point, he's like, now, and this is why it's so important. Hezekiah is a rose between two thorns. His father's name was Ahaz. And Ahaz was an extremely wicked king. He was actually the one who brought all of those idols into the temple that Hezekiah had to clean out. Does that make sense? Why is that important? Because he said, well, what's going to be the sign that I'll be able to go back to the house of the Lord in 3 days? Do you remember what it was? We'll turn back time. Now, we can talk about that from a scientific thing, and people are like, that's impossible. God couldn't reverse the rotation or any of... First of all, if you get past the first verse of Scripture, he could do whatever he wants. But God could have done it in a million ways. God could have just refracted light. God doesn't have to do all of that, but he could do whatever he wants. People are like, well, that's nonsense. If God did all of that, everything would fly off the earth and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, as if God doesn't know what he's doing. Like, God's like, hold on a second, let's say, oh my goodness, what have I done? You're talking about someone who's infinitely wise as well as infinitely and almighty. But I think the interesting thing here is that God turns back the time and he uses as a timekeeper the sundial of who? According to this, look at verse 11. The sundial of Ahaz. Remember the wicked dad that he had? I want to warn you, in those 15 years, a child will be born to Hezekiah named Menasha. And Menasha, whose name literally means he makes me forget, will be the wickedest king in the history of Judah. He will be worse than dad. It'll be as if you forgot Hezekiah ever showed up. And what's interesting is, and I'd like you to consider, and I'll let you ponder it on your own, that in these borrowed years of ease, it would be as if you turn the time back to the time of Ahaz. And that's what will happen with his son. Does that make sense? Now look at it. Don't outlive your faith. Don't outlive your growth. Paul, at the end of his life, when he's about to die, says, I've run the race, fought the fight, I've won the race, I've kept the faith. And now there awaits me a crown of life, which the Lord has prepared for those, not only for me, but for all those who've loved his appearing. At the end of Paul's life, he didn't say, planted a bunch of churches, saw a bunch of people saved. We started a whole new religion. By the way, you're probably aware that the apostles never thought that they were starting a new religion. They just thought they were completing an old one. Paul just said, after watching all of these people who seem to be supermen in the faith fall away, I'm just glad to have clung to Jesus through the end of this. And I wonder if there were times in Paul's life, because he said he despaired of even life itself, where Paul's like, God, please don't let me fail you at this time. Don't let my faith not hold on. And when all of it's done, after all the crazy stuff he's gone through, he's just like, I did it. And I can almost see him looking at Nero and going, oh, be my guest. Whack off my head, man. Because I am the right place for you to do that. I'm in the best headspace for you to take it off. But unfortunately, that's not going to be Hezekiah's situation. Y'all with me? Let's read the rest of it and we'll bring this to close. It'll please you to know, if you're a time watcher, that the rest of it doesn't have that much of development. But it's important to remember that Assyria's on its way out. Remember, that was because, 185,000 guys just got killed by an angel. There's a whole new movie, or a whole new TV series, Touched by an Angel. Yeah, 185,000 Syrians touched by an angel. Anyways, But now as they start to decline, I remind you, Babylon now starts to take over and fill that power vacuum. And they start to go and check out what took place, because Hezekiah was supposed to die and he hasn't died now. Which tells me that his sickness, but I remind you, when a guy just takes on an invincible army and takes them down, you kind of take note of the guy. Is that fair? And now here he is. Now look at the thing about boil infections is that takes time. He's been getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and that takes note. People take note of that. Because at the moment, this is the toughest kid in your school. And now he's not looking so good. And then he heals. And I wonder if the Babylonians were like, we should attack while this guy's weak. And then he gets better, and it's like, oh, we're friends, right? Well, that's kind of where we're at. Look at verse 12. At that time, what time is it? The time that he actually recovered. Beradach Baladan. His name, for what it's worth, means worshiper of Baal. That should tell you something. The son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, kind of like a little flower package, for he heard that Hezekiah had been sick. Verse 13.
And Hezekiah was attentive to them and showed them all the house of his treasures, the silver and gold, the spices and precious ointment, and all his armory, all that was found among his treasures. There was nothing in his house or in his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them.
When Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and said to him, "What did these men say, and from where did they come to you?" So Hezekiah said, "They came from a far country, from Babylon."
And he said, what have they seen in your house? So Hezekiah answered, they have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them.
Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord.
Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord.
And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be in the palace of the king of Babylon.
So Hezekiah said to Hezekiah, the word of the Lord which we have received. So he said, will there not be a feast and truth and peace in the
Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah, all his might, and now he had made a fool and son and brought into the city. Having it written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah.
So Hezekiah rested with his father, then Menasha.
Just so you know, chapter 21, verse 1 says Menasha was 12 years old when he became king. First of all, that should freak you out because I can't. I've had 2 daughters. They've both been 12. It would not be a good idea. Okay, now, so this king sends envoys. He sends ambassadors with a little gift basket. You know, kind of a little balloon, get well soon, glad to hear you're better, that kind of thing. And as it does, maybe a little plush toy or whatever they gave 2,700 years ago. And with that, how does Hezekiah respond according to this? What does he do as a response?
He shows all his wealth and treasures.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get specific. What does he show them? According to this verse, yeah. What's that?
The house of his treasures, the
Silver, gold, spices, precious ointment, and armory.
Okay, now, why would you show off your silver and gold? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, imagine, if you will, someone came over to your house and was like, and I've heard that you've been sick, but now you're better. And you're like, well, first of all, let me show you this. Swing! iPhone X extended. Right? And while you're at it, check out this watch. Right? Just want to show you that. I mean, could you imagine your friend would be like, what? Now, hey, not only am I healed, but check this out, right? Oh, and by the way, let's go over here. Do you see that car out there? The Bentley? That was mine. Don't believe me? Watch this. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Right? I mean, imagine. Right? Oh, and by the way, check out this. The flat screen. You thought that was a shiny wall? No, that's my flat screen. And you can imagine, but he doesn't just show him all of his wealth. What else does he show?
popularity.
It's a commitment.
And it's spicy.
Right. Okay. He shows him his spices and his precious ointment. So no, wait a minute. What would be a precious ointment? What's that? Frankincense would be precious. It could certainly be. I'm going to put it together with what you know of the story already. I think you might be right. What if? He's like, and check it out. This is the miracle drug. This made me well. That's kind of a funky thought, isn't it? For what it's worth, the word ointment is the word saman. And the word saman, by the way, in essence simply means a goo. It can be an ointment, it can be anything, but it's basically a goo. Now, again, might I say, ointment's the word, it's a goo. Is it clearly the fig stuff? No, that's extra biblical. Remember how we're like that. But it does seem a little interesting it's in the same chapter. But what's clear is, check out all my bling, and check out my spices. Oh, my spices. Now, what would be so important about spices? Like, let's say, like here, let's go back a couple hundred years ago. And if someone wanted to see the benefit of a king, he would show them his spices. What would that say?
Things you have to import mostly.
Excellent. It shows your influence beyond your area. It shows your dominion not just in my hood, but dude, I got this from India. I just want you to know this is from Ethiopia. Right? I mean, you get to the point where you start to realize it's not just check out my bling, but now check out my influence, my power over all of these places. Oh, and check out my ointment. But what else does he show him? His armory. Why would you do that? Because if you showed off all your bling, you better show off how you've guarded it. You know what I'm saying? Oh, by the way, I just want you to know this room is alarmed. Right? But, I mean, what would you do today? You'd be like, oh, by the way, I just wanted to show you black belt. Thank you very much. So if you won't mess, do you really want that Bentley or you really want my watch? You won't get hurt. Now, think about what this is. Money is your, think about it. Money is your support, is your future. It's in other words. You have ointment, that's your health. You have the spices, which is your power and influence, and your armory, which is your strength and security. It's all the things that God's supposed to be. But what's interesting is, you know, the one thing he did not show him is God. The one who actually did heal him. This was an opportunity, a prime opportunity, for him to say, God did this. You should know him. Let's be honest. It's fair to say if you've walked with the Lord for any period of time, we've all been guilty of this to some degree. God has done something, and we had the opportunity to just brag on God. But somehow it wound up being about us instead. Instead of us being the bus to get him to the destination, we became the destination. Well, you can see why there's a problem. And they're like, oh, so what are they going to do? They're going to go back. Now, here's the interesting thing. What you bragged about, they're going to go back and share. 900 miles away. What if he had shared Jesus? Well, in this case, what if he had shared the power of the living God? Would they have gone back and shared that? Think of the treasure that would have been. But instead, they go back and talk about the treasure you do have. And here's the interesting thing. When you talk about an honest and genuine treasure that has affected your life, people will talk about it, and the result is people will want it. And people are like, what healed your marriage? What made you sane? What still holds you together? What keeps you from flying off the deep end? Jesus does. He is my treasure. And when you're honest about it, people are going to want it. Isaiah comes back and he goes, home, loose paraphrase, Holmes. He goes, who was that? Some envoys from Babylon. No, Isaiah probably has an inside scoop to know that this is the next group of people. Daniel had already prophesied, by the way, for what it's worth. Well, actually Daniel will, he's yet. But there are going to be prophecies about 4 kingdoms. And by the way, the Greeks and the Romans are the 2 that will follow. But the first 2 are Assyria and Babylon. You can see me having the inside scoop and going, dude, they're just the next one in the queue. Daniel won't show up until the 400s, so we have about 300 years still on this. Well, in fairness, to be honest, he'll show up in the 500s. It'll be about 560, 570. Because he's actually taken in 586 BC as captain. But you realize, it's like just because you had one challenge defeated does not mean another one's not queuing up to take you on. Now here's the point. And now we're almost done. Some challenge meets you. It's a life-threatening, overwhelming challenge. And the only place you can go is to cry out to God, because you know the only one that can handle this is Him. And you do. And God answers, and He rescues you. And you're like, thanks God, see you next trial. And then you start leaning on other things again, because you're like, things been conquered. There is another challenge queuing up. I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist. But that next challenge is going to bring you back to the Lord, or it should. But in these 15 years, he doesn't get but 3 years into it. When I say this way, he doesn't get 2 years into it without impregnating a girl that's going to give birth to Menasha, who is going to be so anti-God, it's devastatingly astounding. And Isaiah looks and he goes, you bragged about everything else, and it's going to leave you. In the end of it all, anything else you rest upon is going to fail you. And anything you genuinely boast on, other people are going to want. So you're like, but I'm afraid if I share Jesus, they won't want it. Might I say this? Treasure yourself in the Lord. And when you do, you're going to be amazed at how people are going to want that. And the challenge is to stay true to continue to offer them the very thing they need, not just what they want. Tonight, as we go to prayer here, he goes, I want to warn you, and this is how it ends. And it tells you a little bit of the heart of Hezekiah. What he says is, hey, by the way, your years won't be so bad. That's what he says, right? He goes, in your years there won't be these challenges, but your sons to follow you are going to be made eunuchs. Now, I don't want to develop what that is. You kind of get the idea. But what's clear is they will never have children. You've lost your legacy. How important is your legacy? The choices that we have to make, that we've talked about today, are about legacy. About seeing boys become men. About seeing right people raise up to do what God has called them to do. And to do that, you've got to value your legacy and not just your comfort. So on one side we could just be like, God, I want to have my life be super easy, and I want to be comfortable, and I want to have no challenges. And God says, but no legacy is left behind that way. On the other side, God, I want my children to know you. I want this fellowship to know you. And I want them to see the prize you are, that they would go and share with other people, that they would want it. But here's the heart of Hezekiah when he says, look, your sons are going to be made eunuchs. All of those things that you would have, you've lost your legacy. You know what he says? All right, cool. As long as it doesn't happen in my day, we're okay with it. What does that tell you? That all he's interested in this point is being comfortable, and that's exactly what he's going to get. But that comfort is going to leave a horrible legacy. And here's the sad part. You are going to leave a legacy one way or the other. You just have to choose what one you'll leave. If what you've seen in any of our lives is a person who's had to be challenged and challenged, but has refused to give up Christ, and have refused to take the easy way out, and have wanted to and sought Jesus for the high road on it, you will be challenged by that for the rest of your life. You don't have to agree with it, but you're going to be challenged to say there was someone determined to do this right. Now that doesn't mean you always will, or I always will, but it is what I want, and it's what I want for you too. Because when Jesus came to earth, there was nothing comfortable about it. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And though that was the case, our Jesus took the hardest way every time because it was the way that was necessary to redeem us. And when he died on that cross, there was nothing easy about it. It wasn't even easy on the cross. You've got a guy next to him that's like, come on, come off the cross. You have guys down there, come off the cross. And you had the power to do it. Which one of you would not go? I mean, come on, if you're really the Son of God, come off the cross. I mean, my temptation would be to go down there and then get back on the cross. But that would have been enough to fail. Do you realize Jesus had to sin once to disqualify himself? Could you imagine that kind of pressure? Talk about the hard road, the high road. And you know what he tells us? Narrow is the road, and difficult is the way that leads to life. And few will find it. Don't expect it to be the easy trodden path, or don't expect it to be the majority. It will not be the highway. At best, it'll be the slip road. But are you willing to take it? Some of you here are pioneers. Some of you here don't need a road to walk in. Good. But just choose the right one. And I just want to pray that as Christ has actually made us new in him, that today we would say, Lord, fill me with that kind of that willingness, that a legacy means something, and that I want to die right and not just start well. Is that fair? Let's pray.